Hello, and thank you for the opportunity to share a summary of my workshop, Rest and Joy as Pathways to Wellbeing, Supporting Black Mental Health Across Generations. My name is Adisa Stewart, and my work sits at the intersections of somatics, restorative justice, expressive arts, and community well-being. Across my work, I'm interested in how individuals and communities move beyond surviving towards practices that support healing, connection, and sustainable well-being. And this workshop was developed from a simple observation. When conversations about Black mental health takes place, we often hear words like resilience, strength, and perseverance. Those are important qualities and they deserve to be acknowledged. Black communities have drawn upon extraordinary resilience to navigate generations of systemic racism, colonialism, economic inequality, displacement, discrimination, and social injustice. But while resilience has helped many communities survive, I believe healing requires something more. Healing asks us to intentionally create space for rest, joy, and community. These are not luxuries or rewards that we earn once the work is finished. Rather, they are essential practices that support the nervous system regulation, emotional well-being, and our capacity to remain engaged within ourselves, our families, and our communities over time. That central idea serves as the foundation for this workshop. So this workshop is designed as an interactive 30-minute session that combines brief embodied practices, facilitated discussion, reflective questions, and practical strategies that participants can integrate into their everyday lives. Throughout the session, I draw on Black wellness traditions, somatic approaches to healing, and contemporary conversations around mental health to create an experience that is both reflective and immediately applicable. The workshop opens with a short grounding practice as we arrive together through a simple breathing exercise using a 4-count inhale, 4-count pause, and a 4-count exhale. The intention here is not simply to help participants relax. It is to introduce one of the workshop's central ideas that well-being is experienced through the body as much as it is understood through the mind. Many people arrive carrying the demands of work, caregiving responsibilities, deadlines, or personal stress. So we begin with a grief grounding practice that allows participants to settle, to become more present, and experience the workshop rather than simply listen to it. It also models one of our practical tools that participants can continue using beyond the session. So following the grounding practice, I introduce the theoretical framework that underpins the workshop. I begin by exploring the distinction between survival and healing. Across generations, many Black families have passed down messages such as work hard, keep pushing, don't complain, be grateful, or be twice as good. These messages did not emerge in isolation. They developed within specific historical, political, and social contexts where perseverance often became necessary for survival. One of the points I emphasize is that these messages were often rooted in love and protection. Parents, grandparents, and caregivers wanted future generations to have opportunities they themselves may not have had. They prepared their children for a world that could be unequal and unforgiving. At the same time, survival strategies can become so deeply embedded that they continue shaping our relationship with work, productivity, emotional expression, and rest long after the immediate circumstances have changed. So this session invites participants to consider an important question. What happens when survival becomes our only way of living? To illustrate this, I use a simple metaphor. I ask participants to imagine carrying a backpack. Every life experience adds another stone to that backpack. Work responsibilities, family caregiving, financial pressures, experiences of discrimination, loss, stress, you name it. So over time, the backpack becomes heavier and heavier. Eventually, carrying that weight begins to feel normal. Many people no longer notice how much they are carrying until they become exhausted or burnt out. So this metaphor helps participants to understand while rest feels familiar or uncomfortable when our bodies become accustomed to function in survival mode. Slowing down may initially feel difficult. Some people even experience guilt when they rest because productivity has become closely connected to their sense of value or identity. From there, I introduced the workshop's core proposition. Healing asks us different questions than survival. So healing asks, where can I create opportunities for repair? Where do I experience genuine joy? Who helps me remember that I don't have to carry everything alone? These questions began shifting the conversation away from individual performance toward a broader understanding of well-being. The next section of the workshop explores these ideas through an intergenerational lens. Rather than treating generations as fixed categories or relying on stereotypes, I invite participants to think about generations as groups of people shaped by different historical moments. Each generation has inherited different economic realities, cultural expectations, technological changes, and conversations surrounding mental health. These broader contexts influence how people think about work, success, emotional well-being, rest, and relationships. So I begin with Generation X. Generation X. Generation X grew up receiving strong cultural messages about responsibility, sacrifice, perseverance, and hard work. Rest was often viewed as something that came after responsibilities were completed if time allowed. Mental health conversations were generally less visible, and emotional struggles were often managed privately. At the same time, I also highlight the tremendous sources of joy that existed within many Black communities: music, church, storytelling, neighborhood gatherings, family celebrations, carnival, dance, humor, and shared meals created spaces where people experienced connection, belonging, and emotional restoration. Long before researchers spoke about nervous system regulation, Black communities were already practicing collective forms of healing through culture, creativity, and relationship. These traditions remind us that joy has never been separate from survival. Rather, joy has often been one of the ways communities sustained hope during difficult times. Continuing with this generational framework, I then explore the experiences of millennials or Generation Y. I often describe millennials as a bridge generation. Many were raised with the same values of perseverance, responsibility, and hard work that shaped previous generations, while simultaneously entering adulthood during periods of significant economic and social change. Student debt, the global financial crisis, rising housing costs, job insecurity, and the emergence of hustle culture created a landscape where success often felt tied to constant productivity. Many millennials have embraced conversations around purpose, work-life balance, therapy, and personal growth. Yet, despite valuing well-being, many also struggle with burnout and feelings of guilt even when they rest. Rest can feel unproductive or undeserved even when exhaustion is present. So this creates important tension that we explore during the workshop. Intellectually understanding the importance of rest is not always the same as feeling permission to practice it. We now turn to Generation Z, a generation that has helped transform public conversations around mental health. Many members of Generation Z have grown up in environments where discussions about therapy, boundaries, and emotional well-being and self-expression are far more common than they were for previous generations. This openness represents an important cultural shift and has helped reduce stigma surrounding seeking support. At the same time, Generation Z faces unique pressures. They are the first generation to grow up in a world of constant digital connection. Their lives are shaped by social media, algorithm-driven content, 24-hour news cycles, and continual exposure to global crises and racial trauma through digital platforms. As a result, although many of the young people recognize the importance of rest and mental health, they often struggle to protect those practices within environments that constantly demand their attention. Throughout this section, I emphasize that the purpose is not to compare generations or suggest that one has has had it easier than another. Instead, the workshop encourages participants to appreciate the ways each generation has adapted to different historical realities. Each generation has inherited popular challenges, has developed particular strengths, and has wisdom that continue to contribute to collective well-being. From there, the conversation shifts towards what all three generations share: music, dance, storytelling, humor, faith and spirituality, shared meals, celebration, and creative expression. These traditions have long provided opportunities for connection, emotional release, meaning making, and collective resilience. One of the goals of the workshop is to help participants recognize that these practices, not simply as cultural traditions, but as long-standing forms of community well-being. The strength-based perspective is important because conversations around Black mental health often focus primarily on the trauma or adversity. While those realities must be acknowledged, I also believe it is essential to recognize the creativity, wisdom, and cultural practices that have sustained Black communities across generations. The workshop then introduces a thematic perspective. I explain that chronic stress affects more than our thoughts, it also shapes our bodies and nervous systems. When individuals experience prolonged stress, discrimination, uncertainty, or repeated adversity, the nervous systems adapt in order to help them survive. This may show up as hypervigilance, anxiety, emotional exhaustion, chronic fatigue, difficulty sleeping, or difficulty experiencing pleasure and relaxation. Rather than framing these responses as personal weakness, I encourage participants to understand them as intelligent survival adaptations. So the body has learned how to protect itself. So this shift in perspective is often meaningful because it moves the conversation away from self-blame and guilt and shame towards curiosity and compassion. So this is where rest and joy become particularly important. Rest supports recovery. It allows the body and mind opportunities to repair and replenish. Joy expands our emotional capacity. It reminds us that well-being is not simply the absence of stress, but also the presence of connection, creativity, pleasure, and meaning. Participants are then introduced to practical strategies that they can integrate into their daily life. Rather than focusing on large or expensive wellness practices, I intentionally emphasize accessible approaches. While self-care is undoubtedly important, Black communities have historically emphasized collective well-being alongside individual well-being. Community care asks different questions. Who checks in on us? Who reminds us to rest? Who celebrates our success? Who notices when we are struggling? Likewise, how do we contribute to the well-being of those around us? Community care may include sharing meals, checking on a neighbor, spending time with elders, storytelling, creating spaces for laughter, and so much more. So participants are encouraged to think beyond individual coping strategies to consider how workplaces, families, our neighborhoods, and organizations can cultivate cultures of care where well-being becomes a shared responsibility rather than an individual burden. Finally, the workshop concludes with guided meditation. Participants are invited to consider several questions. What messages about rest did I inherit? Which of those messages continue to serve me? Which am I ready to release? And where do I experience genuine joy? These questions help participants translate the workshop into practical action, encouraging sustainable change rather than temporary inspiration. Ultimately, my hope is that participants leave with more than information. I hope they leave with a deeper understanding of how history, culture, and lived experience shape our relationship with well-being. I hope they leave with a renewed appreciation for the cultural traditions that have long sustained Black communities. And perhaps most importantly, I hope they leave with recognizing that while resilience has always been one of our greatest strengths, it doesn't have to be our only story. So Thank you for taking the time to learn more about this workshop. I appreciate your consideration, and I look forward to the opportunity to share this conversation with your audience. Blessings.